Hey guys, just want to share a quick game with you. I've just played a couple of blitz games and I sucked at the first one, but the second one's really cool. I played black in both of them, and both of them have the French defence. So I just want to share this with you because it's a really interesting example and a great finish. Okay, so my opponent starts with e4, I play e6. So this is the French. Knight to f3 is very common, and I play c5, and now a3, which is not an uncommon move in the French actually. And now knight to c6, bishop comes out, and now I push d5. So I do have two defenders on this pawn, my opponent has two attackers. So the question is, do we exchange? And yes, so now we've got kind of a French exchange setup. I'm the only one with central pawns at the moment. My opponent now drops his bishop all the way back to a2. I develop my knight, and now h3 is pushed. I bring out my bishop, so I'm getting quite close to completing development here. And now d3, and the final minor piece comes out into the board. So I'm looking kind of okay at this point. My opponent castles, I castle. Bishop comes out, pinning the knight against the queen. My opponent's only spent 15 seconds so far in his moves, so he's doing quite well. So knight now to e5, just trying to get it in closer to my opponent. Maybe get rid of this knight here that's guarding on f3, because sometimes what I like to do in the French exchange is to get my bishop and my queen and try and get a sneaky checkmate on h2, which is more likely when you're playing a 5-minute blitz. So we do actually exchange the knights, and I'm looking all right here. Still, c3, bishop drops back, getting ready for the queen to jump in front and maybe dive in for a cheeky mate. But white doesn't allow this. Well, in fact, the mate is still on, but he's brought his queen out here. So now he's got two attackers against only one defender, which is the pawn on g7. So the danger is he's going to open up my king. But with me moving my queen to d6, I was hoping to catch him unawares. I was hoping that he would think only about his own plans and forget about covering his defences. So he spots that, plays g3 to block my queen coming in, and now I move my knight out of the way to prevent it being captured and forcing my pawn in front of my king to have to recapture. So now bishop comes across, attacking my queen, and I block with the knight. This is not usually the best move. I think simply getting out of the way with the queen would have been absolutely fine, but here obviously I'm inviting maybe an exchange of pawns, and then the pawn would be attacking my pinned piece, and you don't want that. So here the queen now comes round to h5. So there's no immediate threats of checkmates. This bishop here on a2 is looking really silly right now. So I now just push f6. It's adding another defender to my knight, and now the pawn does come in. So I respond to that with a counter-attack. Now it doesn't really do much to help my knight situation here. And now the queen moves across. Now what I could have done, or maybe should have done at this point, is get out of the pin this way by attacking my opponent's king with check. So I could have actually escaped it that way. Then the queen now moves to h5. So this actually prevents my idea of getting in there with my knight and getting my knight out of the pin. So I move my queen out of the way and I lose my knight. So I'm now down a full minor piece. I have 3 minutes left on the clock. My opponent has 3 minutes 40. I capture the pawn. He captures the pawn. I decide I don't want to trade dark squared bishops at this point. I'm already down a piece, so trading is not going to be good. The queen now comes back to d1, and I push c4, thereby really imprisoning this bishop in the corner there. So although I'm down a piece at this point, this bishop is very bad, and likewise the rook behind it is not yet in the game. This knight still hasn't developed, so there may still be opportunities to get some kind of advantage in the game. So the bishop now retreats to f4, and I grab the loose pawn on h3. Rook comes out to attack my queen, and I line up my queen here on c5. So clearly again I'm looking for another mating opportunity. There's no point hanging around and waiting for my opponent to start developing his pieces and then to come at me with his extra material. I have to take the initiative in this game. So the bishop now comes back, skewering my queen. The bishop's defended by that pawn, so it looks like I'm going to lose my dark squared bishop. White now indeed does take the dark squared bishop. Now is the key moment really in the game. I think a lot of players would simply recapture the bishop at this point in time. But I don't have to do that because I do actually have other tactical options on the board. Right, so can you see a threat that I can now bring to bear in the game and still maybe have the option of recapturing that bishop later on? Okay, so here it is. I push d4. That now develops, it opens up this diagonal so that my queen could actually jump into g2 on the next move with checkmate. And black cannot prevent that and save his bishop at the same time. So he pushes a pawn. Now what do I do? Now should I capture the bishop? Okay, I'm now 5 points of material down. I decide not to do that. I decide to capture the pawn with my rook. The rook is defended by my queen, so it's okay. And now I'm threatening to take the pawn on g3 and really open up the black king. So the light square bishop now captures a pawn with check. I simply move my king out of the way. I'm not concerned about the back rank because the only option for check is rook to e8, and I just grab the rook if that happens, so that's all right. Now the bishop comes down to f1, and I capture the pawn with check, opening up and allowing my opponent to do a king fork, which is probably the most unusual and uncommon type of fork, whereas attacking the bishop and the rook at the same time. Now technically the rook is actually defending the bishop, but the rook itself is undefended. So what I decide to do is I decide to capture white's bishop. I then lose my rook, and again I defer. I give up the opportunity to capture the bishop because I'm not going to win the game by being conservative or passive in any way. I've got to strike now to have any chance of winning this because I'm so far behind. I'm basically two minor pieces down. I'm 6 points down. And now the king comes out to f3. Okay, if you were black, what would your next move be? There is actually a winning move, and I'll show you what it is now. Rook to f8 is actually a checkmate. There is nothing around this king whatsoever, right? But if you look at it, the rook is covering the whole f file, and the queen is covering the whole g file, right? This bishop is covering e2, this solo pawn is covering e3, and my queen is covering e4, so the king has nowhere to go. It is an absolutely stunning checkmate from a completely losing position. So there you go. What's the moral of the story? Never give up, and sometimes the best form of defense is attack. All right, thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. I'll see you very soon.